Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Rick Hofer. I'm the director of SPEAK, which is putting on the first annual SPEAK Symposium. We had a great first session, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the next two speakers that we have for this second session. Well, to begin with, we will hear from Dr. Terry Mizrahi. She was a faculty member at the Silberman School of Social Work at Hunter College at City University of New York for 39 years. And I have to say, I haven't known her all that time, but all of my interactions with her over the years have been so wonderful. She's bright, articulate, and just a real go-getter, which it makes sense that she taught community organizing, social policy, and health policy. As of 2020, she co-chairs the Special Commission to Advance Macro Social Practice in Social Work. And in 2017, she founded, and she still co-chairs, the National Social Work Voter Mobilization Campaign alongside with Mimi Abramovich. Terry served as the elected national president of the National Association of Social Workers from 2000 and 2003, and is founder of ACOSA's Journal of Community Practice in 1994. She's quite the scholar. She has 5 books and monographs and 70 articles, book chapters, reviews, and manuals. Her areas of research, training, and consultation include professional socialization, coalition building, community organizing practice, and health policy. And now it's with great pleasure that I turn the over to Terry. So Terry, welcome, and we're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Hello, I'm Terry Mizrahi, Professor Emeritus from the Silberman School of Social Work at Hunter College. And I'm co-chair of the Macro Commission, which is short for the Special Commission to Advance Macro Practice. Yes, macro matters more than ever, as you will hear from my talk today. It's entitled The Challenge of a Friendly Administration, which we have today with President Biden and Vice President Harris. They were supported by NASW through its PAC or PACE committee. This is not the first time, but it feels like a long time since we social workers have been recognized as part of the solution and not part of the problem. You may remember the era of the conservative politicians from President Reagan, Bush in 84 to 91. President Reagan called us bleeding heart liberals. And when President Clinton invited the NASW leadership to be part of his inaugural event in 92, we indeed came in from the cold. Now, after 4 years of a president who ignored us and ignored social workers, it's time to be at the table, which we are, figuratively and literally. And as someone who continues to wear the hat of a community organizer, my philosophy and principle of organizing is both and not either or. Slide 2. Both and, it means being at the table and being at the door. It's a time for criticism and a time for compliments. Both and means behind the scenes with the criticism and in the public space with the compliments. At least we begin that way. And a both and rather than an either or approach is not wishy-washy. It's an intentional strategy to be sure that we are the most effective as a profession in promoting social work values, our agenda, specific policies, and program recommendations. So it's a time for cooperation and collaboration, and there's a time for confrontation. And what does being at the door means? Well, it means organizing, participating, and even leading social activist strategies, including social protest, as we saw last summer on the streets. And we continue with our lead or our lobby days in state legislators and the halls of Congress. Slide 3. So with a both and strategy, being at the table and at the door, goes some principles that guide it. One principle is that there are no permanent adversaries or allies. And what do I mean by that? Social workers need to always be strategic about how we work and influence politicians. We neither fawn over them nor frown on them. For those elected officials who've been our adversaries in the past, it still means we try to influence them, even if they hold a different ideology, and even if we don't ultimately convince them. We don't avoid them, and we don't make assumptions about their stance in advance. So that leads to another principle. Don't alienate prematurely or necessarily. Don't assume that they will have a different position or philosophy, or they'll say no. What will they support if not your proposal? Ask, learn their arguments, and be prepared to address them. And a word about decision-making. Consensus is not unanimity. As you move forward with your cause or your campaign, there must be just enough agreement to progress. Is it okay to move ahead? It's not unanimity, it's consensus. Slide 4. And still another guiding principle. This may sound naive, but it's not. Assume goodwill and common cause on the part of your adversaries. That's for strategic and moral purposes. So let's identify the strategies of influence. The principle to begin with is called least contest. And that means stating that you know they want to do the right thing. So first we educate. Maybe they were uninformed. Maybe they're misinformed. We escalate the strategies and tactics accordingly by their responses. We move from education to persuasion. What will motivate them to change their position? And that leads to another principle. Don't alienate prematurely or unnecessarily. And slide 5, we make strategic assumptions that they want to do the right thing, that they care about the issues like we do. We give people a chance to save face, to change their minds, to give them a second chance. It's better late than never most of the time. Remember, being magnanimous is not being weak. In slide 6. So how do you increase your influence? Well, if there's an ally in the White House or in your state capital, as there is now, we want to support them. Yes, pressure them, but we don't want to start off being critical publicly when they don't support or promote a policy proposal. Not immediately. Wait until the private behind-the-scenes approaches run out of steam or it's not working. Shame and embarrassment are tactics to escalate the strategies of influence, but not at the beginning. So we begin by doing our homework, getting to know those policymakers, whether it's a state legislator, a congressman, or a town supervisor, or a city council, or a mayor. Learn their past positions, their public pronouncements, and their personal and professional connections. Which side do they come on? This will tell you how to appeal to them. What will persuade them? What do they care about? It means doing your homework. This is called reframing the issue. What is in their strategic self-interest that would make them support your proposal? How can we make that common cause? Will a personal connection to someone affected by the issue persuade them? Substance abuse issue, elderly parent. Now, in this climate today, the connection could be everyone knowing someone who suffered the health or economic consequences of the pandemic. Are there people or organizations who could influence them? Did you know that President Biden's daughter is a social worker and a proud one, and he's proud of her? The bottom line, nothing is stronger than building a relationship, as we social workers well know. It's the best tool of our trade. It takes time, patience, and a long-term vision. Next is offering yourself as an expert. Don't assume that politicians know the issue they're being asked to support. Let them and their staffs know that you or your agency or your organization knows something about it, or it has experiences with the issue, or it did a study on the issues. Then tell the story in compelling ways. How do we do that? You personalize your expertise and then extend it. For example, Mrs. Jones is suffering from X, which is affecting her ability to do X, and it's costing the government and taxpayers X. And then generalize it, universalize it. Did you know that there are 10,000 people in your state who are also affected by Mrs. Jones' circumstances? The best combination of arguments are those that include qualitative and quantitative data. You better believe they read their emails, or their staff does, their letters, their messages, their social media. Increasing your influence may mean getting to their staff. Don't be disappointed when you get an appointment or a meeting or an online exchange with a staff person, even an intern. Those roles are what we call facilitating actors. Those staffers or interns or colleagues have the ear and trust. The critical actor is the political leader or the CEO or the editor who you want to influence. Learn both who the facilitating actors are, who have the ear and trust of the critical actor. Slide 7. If you or your coalition or constituency find yourselves at the table, well, you have their ear. So consider and discuss in advance of that meeting or that session, what's your group's bottom line? The outcomes of a political process are almost always about compromise. Be prepared to negotiate and compromise. They're not dirty words. So here's the elements to consider on a continuum or spiral. When do you capitulate? That is, when do you acquiesce? Well, we're not going to get that item on this year. That's one end. And at the other end, when do you resist or reject? There's no way we can accept that. It's a deal breaker. But between capitulation on one end and resistance, there's a long and extended path of bargaining, negotiation, and compromise. There is a well-known phrase, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Consider what's attainable now. Is it good enough? Is it on the right track? Is it the right direction? Can we come back again? And remember again to give people the ability to save face. Slide 8. On the outside at the door. When we're at the door and not at the table, we haven't been invited in or we choose not to go in, social workers must be in there for the long term. Persistent, persevere, be vigilant, and take advantage of what we call, of course, the window of opportunity. It's all about timing and context. It may not be the right time. Look for new opportunities like the change of administration we're in now. If you're in it for the long haul, you can always go back to the drawing board. Want to increase your visibility and credibility with those critical and facilitating actors. Now on the outside, we knock, we make noise, but we don't break and enter. You all remember January 6th. We want to build allies and anticipate and minimize the opposition. So how do we build our allies and lessen our adversaries? Well, maybe it's changing the messenger. Maybe it's changing the message. There's a huge difference with the messenger on who's doing the asking, who's up front, by background, status, profession, celebrity. Some of you may recall, remember the name Ryan White. Ring up a bell? Ryan White was a white young boy who contracted AIDS from a blood transfusion needed because he suffered from hemophilia. Well, when he came before Congress, it was to show them that the so-called innocent people could contract AIDS. And that's what changed the mind of enough political leaders to pass and continue to fund the Ryan White HIV/AIDS Prevention and Treatment Act of 1990. And guess what? It was under Bush 41. And it's been reauthorized ever since. Or we changed the message. What a game changer when the leaders of the LGBTQ movement changed the terminology and argument from same-sex marriage to marriage equality. By many informed experts, that seems to have made a big difference in attracting allies. And it may have turned the tide for the Supreme Court and other judicial rulings that followed. Now, if we want to escalate further on the outside to social action and mass mobilization, if your organization has the people power or resources? That's an assessment you make together. Don't promise if you can't deliver. Change the incentives, change the place, be realistic. Don't promise 10,000 people are going to come out tomorrow if 100, but if 100 people will come out, you can use them strategically. Slide 9. Remember the other in the inside and outside continuum. Does it promote unity or division? There are different roles to play when you're on the inside and on the outside, when you're at the table or at the door. The same people may not be interested or equipped to be at both. So many of my principles, and a part of any social change strategy, is show respect for the other side. Those on the inside need those allies on the outside, and those on the outside need their allies on the inside. That does not always happen to the detriment of the cause or campaign. More often than not, there's suspicion and distrust of the other. And those on the outside assert that those on the inside are being co-opted or selling out. And those on the inside condemn the outsiders as rebel rousers who are discrediting the cause. And what happens? The policymakers and those who are resisting change respond by a divide and conquer strategy. It's so much more effective to be unified, or at least to be coordinated. So slide 10, a final word about consideration when on the outside or at the door. It means exercising all the First Amendment freedoms that the Constitution gives us: the freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, showing up, jamming telephone lines, social media to attract and get your points across. And that includes up to civil disobedience that could end up in an arrest for you or other folks who are part of that strategy. Don't be caught off guard. So when considering rallies, demonstrations, creative art, remember the quilt project of the HIV/AIDS era? That was an amazing project that got the attention of the media and the masses. You might do street theater, and again, nonviolent civil disobedience. Social workers must play out the worst and best of outcomes with their constituencies. And here's the ethical considerations. They are essential here. Yes, to take calculated risks, but the principle is no surprises. Weigh the risks, be informed, recognize that some people and groups may be more vulnerable and hesitant for a variety of reasons. Listen to them. Consider different ways for allies to contribute to the cause. So in closing, I want to remind us and refresh us all of the NASW Code of Ethics. If you haven't taken a look at it, go to the NASW Code 2017 to Section 6. And it's the social work's ethical responsibilities to the broader society. And you'll see a whole bunch of mandates for us as social workers to publicly participate and all the range of social and political action. Thank you very much for listening today, and I welcome comments, suggestions, and criticism. Hi, everybody. I'm back live.
Well, thank you very much. I know some questions are coming in, but we're going to let Alison go next. Let me give her a little shout out and introduction, and then we will get to the questions. But thank you for that very enlightening presentation. I think we may get a number of challenges in the information that Alison shares with us, just in terms of, well, what do we do when it's the opposite? So Alison Mohr Boleware is the Government Relations Director at the NASW Texas chapter. Previously, Alison worked as a health policy analyst in the Government Affairs Department of the Texas Medical Association, and before that, as a policy fellow for the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health, participating in the Hogg Mental Health Policy Academy. During the 84th legislative session, Alison served as a legislative aide to former state representative Elliot Nash State, also a social worker. She staffed the House Human Services Committee, working primarily on policy issues related to child welfare, mental health, disability services, and Medicaid. Alison received her Master of Science in Social Work from the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin, with a community and administrative leadership focus. She received her undergraduate degree from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor of Arts in International Studies, minors in Sociology and Asian Studies. Now, if there's anyone on the panel that I know who can do an excellent job of talking about how to work with an unfriendly administration, I think Alison is the person to do it. And I'm so happy she's with us. And I expect a great discussion between Terry and Alison when they're both over and around the questions. So be sure and keep putting the questions in the chat. All right, Alison, thank you for being here. We're so pleased.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor. And it's honestly tough to follow Terry. I was like, I don't even know how to compare. She's written so many books. That's so amazing. But it's great to be here. And as Richard shared about my experience, I really have had, different ways of navigating the Texas legislature, both from being a staffer to being an advocate and now with NASW. So I'm excited to share my experience and kind of speak to what it looks like on the ground working in an unfriendly administration and how to influence that from a social work perspective. But first, yes, my name is Alison Mohr Boleware. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Government Relations Director. First, we're going to talk a little bit, and Terry, I'm so glad brought up the Code of Ethics because we're going to talk about that first, that social workers are advocates. Then we're going to get in the weeds on the demographics of the Texas legislature, why Texas is how it is, and some realistic advocacy action steps that folks can take to engage with an unfriendly administration, and some resources that you can use for those advocacy action steps. A bit about NASW is that we do represent social workers and the clients that we serve, both in and around the Capitol. We have over 5,000 members across the state. We're the ones that make sure that social workers are kept into important conversations at the Capitol. We fight for y'all. We fight to make sure that bills that have social workers in them are what social workers really want. And we also fight for clients that we serve, weighing in on a bunch of different social justice issues. NASW Texas is member driven through our board, our equity committees, and our political action committee. So we do actually have a PAC, which I will speak to that in a bit. And these are the 4 equity committees that we have below. Very briefly, I just wanted to remind everyone, this is from the Code of Ethics. Social workers are called to be advocates. Even if you are a clinical social worker, your desire and your heart is to be a therapist, that's amazing and that's awesome. And we need you. There's a huge mental health professional shortage in Texas, but you're also called to be an advocate. And, that looks different for everyone, but you have no excuse not to be involved, engaged, and also know about different issues. And I always try to remind people that when we're doing this advocacy work, it is both with and on behalf of our clients, and it should never be without the voice of the folks that are actually impacted. All right, so let's get into the weeds of the Texas legislature. So one thing that folks don't always remember, and I always love to highlight this, is that we are actually only a slight majority Republican over Democrat if you actually look at the breakdown of the Texas Senate and the Texas House. But our leadership is Republican. So of course, with the leadership being Republican, they're going to pick other Republicans to be leaders with them, whether that be committee leaders or work group leaders, or even just who they choose to file bills. So I think that's an important thing to note, is that we're actually a lot closer than people think. When I first started this work in 2015, I was at the Capitol working for a representative, and that was actually the most heavily Republican legislature there had ever been in Texas, and that was in 2015. And since then, we've actually been skewing more to the middle. So I always want to remind people of that. The legislature is 80% male identifying. And in fact, there have only been 168 women that have ever been elected to the Texas legislature. And so even if you took all of the women that had ever held an elected position in the Texas legislature, they would not fill all of the positions available. It is majority white, which I will speak to more on the next page. 60% of our legislators are actually lawyers, which talks about kind of the educational background of a lot of the folks that are representing us. And I forgot to come back to this slide, but the majority are over the age of 50. And the majority do identify as Christian. All right, so I always want to just show this slide, honestly, kind of for the shock value, but also that this is the reality of the legislature. The legislature does not represent the extremely diverse state that we live in, right? I'm from Texas. I grew up here. I grew up in a small town, actually, in West Texas. I love this state, and we are a very diverse state, but the legislature does not reflect that. So if you look at this, this is actually from the 2019 session. 80% of, excuse me, Democrats in both chambers are people of color, compared to 4% of Republicans. And then if you look at the entire legislature, 36% are people of color compared to the larger percent. Sorry, it's covered up by the little thing on my, 58% of Texans are people of color. So just looking at that, that's already setting up the culture of this body. Then you look at LGBTQIA plus representation. Until in the 20-teens, there had never been an openly LGBTQ plus person serving in this body. But in 2019, 3 folks won their races as legislators that also identified openly as LGBTQIA plus. And so that brought the membership of the committee, of the LGBTQIA plus community from 2 to 5. And those folks decided to create a caucus. So in 2019, they created the caucus and were extremely effective at stopping anti-LGBTQ bills. And that caucus is extremely effective, or is extremely active right now with many of the things going on. But again, just keeping in mind, the fact that this caucus did not exist until 2019, the fact that there had not been openly LGBTQ plus people until the 20-teens is, again, a culture thing to know about the legislative body. So why Texas is how it is. And I think I worded that a little strange, but you'll see what I mean. So some historical context. Why does Texas do things the way that we do things? We wanted legislators to be, quote, real Texans. And when they wrote the Texas Constitution in the 1800s, they put a lot of things in there to show that they didn't want legislators to be career politicians. They didn't want them to all be people who lived in Austin that didn't know what was going on in other parts of the state. So they created a few different things to ensure that legislators would be real Texans. First, they made sure that the amount that they were paying the legislator wasn't enough to live on, so that no one would just be a legislator for their full-time job. So today, they only make $7,200 just from being a legislator, and that's their yearly salary today. Of course, it was different throughout time. It's extremely hard for real Texans to be legislators, and that's for a few reasons. First, you must have a job where you can be gone for 6 months at a time during the regular session. Then you have a situation like 2021, where we are now in our 3rd special session. So you have people that have been in Austin the majority of the year. We actually only had 6 weeks off of this entire year where there was not a session. So you have to have someone that can be gone from their job that long. You also have to have someone who makes enough money to support missing work and to fund travel for campaigns. And they must be connected enough to win elections, which usually means, wealthy donors and big political action committees that can endorse them, and both endorse them with a name, but also endorse them with money. Because there's no way, unless someone is just extremely wealthy, that they would be able to afford a campaign in modern time. So all of those things together create this environment where it is not a very representative body to the actual makeup of Texas and the needs of Texans. And that really exemplifies itself in the culture of the Texas Capitol. If you've been there in person, it's a beautiful, beautiful building, but there are a few things about it that you might note. It's not extremely accessible for people with disabilities. Parking is not easy. There's only one entrance into the building that has wheelchair accessibility. There are no maps located in the building. So if you're new there, it's extremely challenging to find places within the building. And there are other things there that, during the legislative session, they don't tell you about hearings until only a few days before the hearing. So that creates a space where it's really hard for people from other parts of the state to get to the Capitol. Then you have the actual culture of both the Senate and the House. The senators have 4-year terms, and there are 31 of them, and they are usually more seasoned politicians, people who have been around, either they've been representatives or in other parts of government, and they're typically older. And then the 150 representatives, they serve 2-year terms. And that culture is usually more rowdy because people are maybe newer to politics and they're trying to make a splash and they don't know if they'll win their reelection. But the culture is very unique to Texas. We meet every other year. That's also something unique to Texas. We're one of only a handful of states that does that. And when we're not in session, we're called the interim. This is actually an older slide because we're actually in our 3rd special session right now, but only the governor may call a special session. And then whatever items the governor puts in the special session, those are the only bills that can pass during that time. And we have the big 3. So this kind of gets back to what I was talking about earlier. We have 3 people who are very conservative running in the that are handling these 3 most important and most powerful positions in the state. And they're called the big 3, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the House. Both the governor and the lieutenant governor are elected by popular vote. So that means that average Texans, any Texan who is eligible to vote can vote for them. Whereas the speaker of the House is chosen by other House members. So this person is not on the ballot as the speaker. So that means that usually the Speaker of the House is a bit more bipartisan, but overall, all 3 of them are really conservative. So that, again, makes decisions about what bills move, what committees are chosen, and who is chosen to run committees, and other things that delineate an unfriendly environment for issues that we care about. Also, it's important to know that in Texas, it's extremely hard to pass a bill. In the 2021 session, over 10,000 bills were filed and only 1,300 passed. In Texas, most bills die, and that's the reality. It's an extremely complicated process to pass a bill, and we've created a system, or I shouldn't say we, the legislators have created a system where you have to be in the building physically to get things done, which makes it extremely hard for people who don't have a full-time job in this space. So here we are, we're on our 3rd special session right now. All the advocates are tired. We are dealing with an extremely unfriendly administration right now. All of these things have been on the different special session topic list, but voting bills that create more restrictions and barriers. We opposed all of the voting bills that would have created more barriers for Texans with disabilities or elderly Texans. There are also abortion restrictions that further restrict abortion from what happened during the regular session. Also continuing to attack transgender youth through anti-transgender bills, redistricting, and then federal American Rescue Plan Act funds, and then some COVID vaccine conversations. But again, each special session is only 30 days. So we are tired. But what can you do? How can you influence an unfriendly administration? We have to be realistic. And this is a little different than what Terry talked about, because we are in a space where we have to be realistic about what we can and can't influence and how we can realistically influence that while remaining true to our social work values. So the first thing I always want to remind people of is you got to vote. You have to vote for people that hold your values. You have to vote for people who will be champions for social workers and for the clients that we serve. Again, do not skip a vote. Do not, use the excuse that you don't know enough. There are tons of resources out there that are nonpartisan that explain what people stand for. We need allies in the building. And this comes about by one, making sure that we have, of course, we want social workers in the building. We have one social worker in office right now. Representative Diego Bernal. But we also need other allies, right? We can't, well, it would be amazing if we had all social workers. The reality of that is challenging, but we can use endorsements through NASW's PAC to endorse champions that align with our values. And we can also elect people into office that we know will champion things that we care about. And we can continue to build relationships with people that are in the building to ensure that they support what we're working on. We need advocates like y'all. We need real people who are sharing real stories with real impact, because y'all who live in different parts of the state can influence the people that are elected to serve you because you are a constituent of them. That in and of itself puts you in a different place because you're someone who they have to listen to because you live in the district that they represent. Sorry, the phone is going off. We have a small group in the office today. We also need advocacy groups that are already doing the work. So whether it's NASW Texas or groups that are very specific to a topic issue like mental health or child welfare, excuse me, we need advocacy groups that are already doing this work that can help to influence an unfriendly administration by continuing to do work that they have done, working within relationships that they already have, making those incremental changes. And we need to relate all issues to the specific legislator and why they should care. So I brought these four icons up to show four different reasons why some people in an unfriendly administration might listen to social workers and what we bring to the table. One is they want to save money. If we can say how a certain policy can save money in the long run, that's a great argument. If we can relate it to a charitable item, this does weigh on the heartstrings of legislators that are more religious. If we can talk about how it impacts children, that's also a way that a lot of legislators will pay more attention to an issue. And same with elderly Texans. If we can focus on how it would benefit elderly Texans, that might raise the interest or perk up some ears in the room. So what are some realistic advocacy steps that you can do? You can meet with the legislator, and I'll share all this information after, so I'm going to kind of speed through this, but you can meet with the legislator. You can prepare for your meeting by making sure you have a very clear ask for your meeting. If you have a specific bill to support or oppose, state that clearly. Determine your why, and be really sure to focus on information that you think that legislator would care about. If they're a veteran, speak to that. If they have a child with a disability, maybe speak to how this would help people with disabilities. Speak to their life experience as you know it. And based on your ask and your why, have your elevator speech ready. Feel really comfortable to go in, say what bill you want them to support or oppose, or what action you want them to take, and why you would like for them to do it. And this is the most effective advocacy tool that you can use during calls, meetings, and more. These are some more tips for a successful meeting, but essentially know as much as you can about the legislator before the meeting. Admit if you don't know the answer to their question. And this is a big one, y'all, especially working in an unfriendly administration. Even if you don't agree with the legislator on the majority of their issues, I always encourage people to find one thing that you can thank their office for, even if it's really hard, even if you disagree with 99.9% of what they do. It really does help build rapport if you can find one thing to thank them for, even if it's something small. Be sure to leave your contact information behind, and this helps build the relationship if they have any questions or if they want to learn more about the issue. You can also engage in existing advocacy alerts that we have with NASW Texas. If you use this bit.ly link at the bottom, it takes you to our Take Action page. Right now, we have an advocacy action that you can take action on right here. It immediately links you to an email that goes to your legislators. And we have a template of an email that you can use. It's actually a really easy way for you to get involved if you don't have time for more advocacy. You can also send an email or a letter on your own. You can also make phone calls on your own, and social media. Terry also mentioned this, but what I always encourage people to do is to promote what advocacy organizations are already sharing. That means that, for example, if you're really passionate about mental health, Maybe you follow National Alliance on Mental Illness or NAMI Texas. Share what they're sharing. They're very a reputable group, and it shows that you're promoting an issue that's already that already has some action steps taken on it. I also encourage people to use hashtags that will garner attention, especially if you're talking about the Texas legislature, hashtag TexasLeg. Y'all, it sounds silly, but the legislators love Twitter. And so even if you're not that active on Twitter, I encourage you to get involved because the legislators love to talk on Twitter. You can tag them and sometimes they'll respond to you, or sometimes they will like your posts. It seems small, but it's a way to build rapport and also a way you can gently call out someone. I encourage you not to use inflammatory language and to keep it focused on the policy and not the person. Or you can call the person in and say, we would love so-and-so to support this bill, and here's why. If you tag them, you're more likely to get them to respond. This is our advocacy toolkit that I'm going to make sure everyone has in the chat. And we do have Social Work Advocacy Day. I have to plug it while I'm here. It's going to be Friday, March 4th in Austin in person. We'll have an advocacy training and practice where we'll build on some of the things I've talked about today, hear from political social workers and advocates, get comfortable in the Texas Capitol, and debrief with other social workers to share and learn about advocacy together. You can follow us, and all of this information will be available. And of course, I have to plug joining NASW. If you're a student, you can get a special student rate of $60, and there are a lot of great opportunities there, as well as knowing that you have someone speaking up for you and the clients that you serve at the Capitol fighting for you. All right. Okay, last one. Sorry, y'all forgot about this. We have our virtual conference later this month. I invite you to join. I'll be doing a longer presentation over the legislative sessions and a forum just on Senate Bill 8, the abortion restriction bill that passed in the regular session. We will be doing a forum just to talk about that bill and how it impacts social workers. All right.
Thank you very much, Alison. That's really good information. And I'm looking forward to a discussion about really the differences, because I'm not seeing that many differences between what Terry said and what Alison said. So maybe advocacy is all the same, whether it's friendly or not friendly. It's just what you can expect. But I want to say, to follow up with Alison, I'll be speaking at the virtual conference, so I'm looking forward to it. So let me just turn to Terry and ask a question that's come up, and that is there anything since you made that video that's changed that you want to just mention, or is it still totally up to date?
Hi, again, Alison, that was terrific. And I think you're absolutely right, Rick, that the principles are the same. You know, it's the building the relationship, it's the doing your homework, and it's who's speaking on behalf of the issue. I think we didn't plan this, and I think that's to show you that I think there's some depth. I see many names here that I know, many folks here today who I don't know, which is wonderful to get to know new folks. Let me just comment. One thing that I wanted to add is just to say that around voting, because I didn't stress that this was more general, but you may know, and hopefully you know, I see actually a colleague here, Alberto, has been very involved with us, that it's the votingassocialwork.org. So if you get to votingassocialwork.org, apropos of resources, there is a ton of stuff, a new and revised website, that anything you wanted to know and anything you could use, whether you're a student on this call, a field instructor, an agency staff person, a faculty, or other social work leader of one of the organizations. So what's changed is the reality. And it goes back to my first sentence of my first slide. It's both and, not either or. Again, we're in this binary world, you know, it's either or. So if anything you heard today, it's neither, it's both and. And again, that means strategic and intentional, that it's both idealism and pragmatism. So Alison started off talking about realism. Well, that's what we're talking about. We want to influence policy, we want to influence change in the direction of NASW's values and our constituency and ourselves. And it's plugging along. So what we see in the 7 months since January 6th is a much more complex picture of what politics looks like. And it is frustrating. Somebody in the chat wrote or asked the question about, aren't we too nice or too polite? I hope you didn't hear that. You heard respect for strategic reasons. We're good people. I love my profession. I've been in it many years. I love our humility. Sometimes we are too humble. Sometimes we don't take the credit enough, all those things. But we're talking about, and again, Alison, we're different generations, we're different parts of the country. We're talking about the same thing. We are using our brains. We're using our strategies to say what's going to work with this legislator. I like to say macro folks are the people who don't do it one at a time, but in this case, it is getting to the folks who can bring us over the edge. It's, we need 51 votes here. How many do we have now? It's so important, I think, what Alison showed, and we could do this for each state, about what who represents us, the collective whole, who's on our side. It's with very few exceptions, and there are a few. We are not in either or situation. I could never sit down with these people, or these folks are always my friends and allies. You have a few at each end, but again, we're talking about the majority and the mainstream today. And the main thing I think I'll say now is you can see everybody who on this call, I think, is preaching to the choir. Voting is the beginning, not the end of the process. And we must convince, if they need convincing, of what the stakes are here. Now, our campaign is nonpartisan. And again, for some of you who may be younger or teaching folks who may not be as well informed, this time we're in now, we are making a difference. And I thought Alison was going to emphasize more the risks and the intimidation that people feel, but at least know your facts. You, in every single agency, you have the right to register people. You have the right to do everything short of telling them who to vote for and which party to join. And I would never be the first one to say, we would never want to do that in any case, whether it's ethical or illegal. But everything short of that is legal, it's professional, it's our obligation to get involved. And you pick your battle. Right now we see, if we have certain things that we think will hold the folks in power who support the social work agenda, then we have to use that view of compromise and the good versus the perfect here. So that's what we see now. We see the real hard slug of what politics are. It may turn off some folks, but many of us are in for the long haul. So that's basically what I want to say. And again, I'm glad Rick emphasized the positive and the commonalities here. And I think I might want to say, given what I heard about the Texas legislator, that there are conflicting views. People have experienced longevity is good. On the other hand, they could be stuck in their ways. Newcomers are great because they add refreshing things, but they don't know the history and context. So what does that show? You need both newcomers and old timers at the table. You need people who remember back 50 years and people who say, this is my first legislative advocacy session.
Great, thank you. That's a very thorough answer. I'm going to kind of throw it back to Alison too, because I know some NASW members who expect a little more militancy. And Terry, you may be able to speak of this in a bit as well. But how do you handle, those people that say, how could you possibly, not want to, get Greg Abbott out of there tomorrow or something like that? I mean, it's just. I'm sure you're on the receiving end of some interesting phone calls.
I am. And it's interesting because I do hear from members that actually go both directions. I hear that I'm too progressive, and then I hear that I'm not progressive enough. So, I think what I try to go back to as much as possible is leaning on Social Work Speaks, that this is never what I, Allison, think about a bill, but it's really about how it relates to social work values. And how it relates to decisions that are on the Social Work Speaks platform that were already decided by experts. As far as how do I handle the conversations about specific political leaders, we do endorse people, and we did not endorse certain politicians. So I think I do try to point to, we didn't endorse that person, but we do have to work with them because they are in this powerful position. And I always try to remind people, you can disagree with someone's political stances. You can disagree with someone's policy choices, till the cows go home. I do, both professionally and personally, but I still have to have the type of relationship with an office where I can go to them and explain to them why we feel a certain way. And I respect both ways. Respect both ways. I expect for them to hear me out in the same way that I will hear them out. Because if I go in a space where I don't want to, if I go in already, kind of teed up a certain way, I don't want to damage a relationship that later that person, that staffer might come back to me and is like, hey, Allison, I know we disagreed about this bill, but my boss is looking into the mental health loan repayment program, and I know y'all are part of it. Can you tell me more? So, there are, it's give and take. It's not perfect. I'm not perfect. And, there's never any way to make everyone happy. But I think as much as possible, I try to remind people that, we are in Texas and we can still stand with our values, but we can do it respectfully.
I think that's an answer we probably all need to hear every now and then. Both you and Terry are really stressing the need for respect, mutual respect. And sometimes I feel like some of our elected leaders don't have respect for social workers. So that's got to be hard. There's another topic I want to bring up, and I think this is for both of you, and that is, how would you see the best way for universities to make sure students have the kind of experiences that push them out into the world with a desire and knowledge about being good advocates, no matter who's in the administration? I don't care who goes first, y'all. Terry, why don't you go first? I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask, many of you are not live, just your names are up on the screen, or I'd ask you to all raise your hand. How many are educators, right or no? Just to know who the audience is. I anticipate with the 75 or so folks who have been on, that we are following, the CSWE guidelines that we call EPAS, the Educational Policy Statements. There's a new one coming out, 2022. And again, I want to say that we're a work in progress. I will not tolerate somebody say social workers have never done anything. Social workers don't care about it. I have no, how do you know? You're not a member of NASW. You haven't looked at this. You're only reading what you want to read. And the other is afraid to criticize our profession. But this is not the time to be public about criticizing social workers publicly, internally. I'm just going to say it outright, that we have to have a united front of what we can accept. What did I say about people at the door, Rick? And I said that there are people who won't be at the table. And that's fine. We need folks out there constantly at the door. It's never enough. It's fine as long as the folks at the door will understand that what the folks at the table are doing is in the best interest and as far as we could go. And I just don't understand this view right now of some folks. We never could go back. And I want to give you one example. It's a historical one for most of you who weren't born or adults in 1974. So those of you remember, certainly I'm hoping you teach it in your policy courses and have known this as history, when Nixon was president. Okay, so we all know who President Nixon was. We know a lot about his policies. We know about the Watergate, but we don't know that he had policies that were promoted in 74 that had, we supported them, not social workers alone, but had the left, the liberals supported them. We would have universal health care through 2 programs, Medicaid and Medicare expanded, would have covered everybody. We would have had federal welfare policies, no more state and local public assistance. It would all gone federalized. And everything was federalized, remember, in 74, except for what? What was called AFDC, what then became TANF. And because what happened? Here's the either or versus the both and. Of course, we knew the conservatives didn't want any welfare, but we had, even with Nixon, it was a friendly administration. So we are making a distinction between friendly and party. Nixon was supporting policies that said we're going to have a minimum guaranteed income. And there was a floor, there was an amount set to it. For Mississippi and the South and all the southern states and the poor states, it would have raised the income level. Okay, but for New York and California, it would have lowered it. So what do you think? Folks, if it was federalized, what's the transformative change and what's transactive? If we had changed that, I use that example because 74, many years ago, was a transformative moment that had implications for today. Hope that makes sense. That, you know, we're in an administration now where we can't afford to lose one person. And we know, I support Alison, we want social workers to run for office. We don't assume they all have all our values. Kristen Sinema, we all know, I hope on this call, that she's a social worker. Get in touch with her. Tell her she's a social, support her. Right now, I understand why she's being criticized, why Manchin is. If you're from West Virginia, talk about what his constituents need. You know, we're not going to win all the battles. And I'm sorry, I feel very strongly that we got to have some wins now if we're going to stay in the majority to get more of what we want in the future. So that's my partisan hat.
Well, that's very helpful, and I agree with you. So very true. Alison, can you talk about how universities and other educational institutions can help NASW as we move forward, as Terry suggests?
Yes. First, I did want to say, just to support students that are interested in advocacy or like doing more of those things, I wanted to say first, as much as possible, universities offering internships that are in different types of advocacy realms, whether it's working in a legislator's office that's in the district, or having an opportunity for the student to intern with an advocacy group or with a Capitol office if they're able to travel. Because having that experience of interning in the Capitol is really what made me decide to go into this direction. So having that, having really strong policy classes that students can take, even if they're clinical focused, but teaching them about advocacy and making sure that they know that their voices are needed too. And then the last thing would just be for students to have information, you know, like symposiums like this that expose them to learning about political social work, and, you know, Social Work Advocacy Day, which both of my interns are here watching, and one of them posted in the chat about our Social Work Advocacy Day, which is in March. But what can students or universities do to help NASW? Honestly, share information about what we're doing, because I think a lot of times people don't always know what we're doing. And so I always encourage people to sign up for our voter voice advocacy alerts. That's a great way to stay plugged into what we're doing at the Capitol. We also have a Twitter page that is just advocacy. It's NASW TX_advocacy. And I run that Twitter. And we talk a lot about what we're doing at the Capitol and what's going on there. So I think educating and also connecting to the events that are happening, as well as sharing about what our legislative priorities are, which that is all available on our website.
Great. The questions are starting to come in a little faster than I can even keep up with. But Alison, there was something that you said you would like to speak to, which was, how do you manage sharing personal opinions so you can still get a job when you graduate?
Yeah, I think that this is a great question, especially with the environment that we live in, because so many people choose to engage in, political discourse on social media. And honestly, I will tell y'all what I tell all of my interns is that be mindful that what you post will be out there, that future employers can look at it. And there is nothing wrong with you sharing your opinions, but I really encourage you to think about not making it personal attacks about people and to keep it as fact-based as possible. And again, there's nothing wrong with sharing opinions. I share opinions too, but just be mindful about, what it could look like for a future employer. And I think if you keep it to the facts and you keep it to the policies and not about the person, then there shouldn't be any challenge with you finding a job and, what that will look like for future employers.
Sure, that's heartening. I know it just, and Terry, I'd like you to kind of speak to this as well. In terms of employment, there's so many people, educators who say, don't go into macro social work because you can't get a job. And I spend so much time trying to battle that from my colleagues, but perhaps you have perfected the way to respond to such a comment.
Well, again, I see a couple of people here share our views, Shannon Lane, I see Gary Parker, other colleagues of mine. My colleague from Israel, who's a big, two colleagues, Johnny Gall and Yossi Korazim, they're folks who work there that same way. That we are, we're one big profession, and we have a lot of opportunities to voice what our common agenda is. And I think that there's just a lot going on now where we're on the brink. We are, yes, at the table. We're recognized by Biden, President Biden and Harris. We have Debbie Stefanow, a wonderful senator. NASW has some really career-changing opportunities now with raising the incomes for social workers under Medicare, and loan forgiveness is right back on the table. So we do see leadership does make a difference. But if join NASW, I said this when I was, sadly, when I was president of NASW 20 years ago, we had 150,000 members. Okay, so and there are 400 something, I believe, licensed social workers around the country. So what can you imagine is that if everybody was part of an association, we don't have to join NASW, and I encourage it, but macro organizations, we have a macro conference coming up. And the last thing I just want to say very specifically about jobs is the challenge for macro social workers, we call macro organizational practice, policy practice, and community practice. That's how we define it. The folks who don't want to do it one at a time, but their jobs are not always called social workers, but that doesn't mean you can't identify yourself as a social worker. I will make a plug. If there are any clinical folks here, or any of you have a card that doesn't have the word social worker on it, next time you reprint your cards or give them out, or on your website or on your signature, please put the word social worker. Please put our title, not just the initials, and not just the acronyms. It's so important that people see that social workers are in policy positions, in government, and in many various advocacy groups. They don't call themselves social workers, so somebody doesn't know. And what happens? How many of you had somebody say to you, I will participate in it without you raising your hand, oh, I didn't know you were a social worker, or how come you're in the position? What does a social worker have to do with this? Please take that as a moment to educate somebody that social workers do these kinds of things. It's a constant battle. We're constantly making progress. And thanks to CSWE, sometimes some schools criticize it. They don't like these mandates, if you will, these imposition, but sometimes they protect us and they do good things. And right now, EPAS 2022 for any accredited school must balance macro and micro in their curriculum. We have to hold the feet to the fire, so to speak.
Well, I encourage people to be creative about what they see as a macro job, because I know people who I graduated with that work at startup companies and HR that work in some very unique positions that you might not think a social worker would be in. One of my close friends works for the Texas Hospital Association, and she uses her social work experience there to make sure that the needs of patients are present in all of the conversations. So I always encourage people to kind of think outside the box if you want to be a macro social worker. Also, don't be afraid to change jobs. I think that, things are changing, in my opinion, as far as how long people stay at jobs. I've been in 3 different roles since I graduated. And I think, there used to be kind of a get in one job and stay in there forever. But in the macro social work space, everyone I know changes jobs, and it's not a huge deal if you get in and you learn it's not for you. I did also want to comment on Annabelle, who said something in the comments about acknowledging that it's a male-dominated field with public administration. I will say that the policy space is also very male-dominated, but I think that's why we just need to, as social workers, support one another. And I think always showcasing why your unique skills as a social worker help you in that space is always really helpful, because a lot of spaces don't realize they need a social worker until you explain why you bring your skills to that specific space.
Let me just add one last thing. Those of you who are connected to schools of social work or organizations, on your homepage, create a video. If you haven't, just do something where the homepage, when you get to your school, you have something called, I didn't know you could do that in social work. Click on it and identify the advocate physicians, or better still, create little mini videos of folks who are macro folks doing it, because we get this every day. For 39 years, I oriented students in information sessions about people who thought they might want to be social workers. And we would say, oh, I didn't, and how many people would come up, oh, I didn't know you could do that in social work. So it's become kind of a mantra, but we have to put our money where our mouth is. You have to practice what we preach. If you care about the issues that are going on today, and they're wonderful sessions today and tomorrow, you care about voting, you care about civic engagement, or you want your agency to do more, we have to show the bodies. Remember, I said qualitative and quantitative. We have to show the people doing it. Don't rely on me. What I did, just let's get the folks who are doing it now right up on your webpage. Not hard, I would hope, to convince your dean, because it attracts more students. And the more students you have who ask for macro, the more macro will grow in your curriculum. And any ideas, and any of you who are doing that in creative ways, as Alison said, what the jobs are, send it to us. Let us know.
Well, Alison, you have one more thing?
Yes, just really quick. People are always shocked that I'm a social worker when they meet me at the Capitol, or are surprised that I worked in a Capitol office as a social worker. But there are actually a lot of social workers in and around the Capitol. So there is so much more to this work than I think people realize. And our skills are actually so helpful in the political space, because we can provide empathy. We can use a lot of those kind of clinical skills that really come in handy when we're in a unfriendly environment.
If there are more questions, we have time. And
there was one, if it's okay, Rick, that we go back to. Let me scroll back up to it. I really liked this question. Hold on, let me scroll back up. It was about, okay, here we go. From Jason. How can you talk to, and I'd love to hear Terry's thoughts on this too. How can you talk to political leaders about bills that disproportionately affect people of color, but who don't believe that outcomes or the intentions of a law or policy are related to race? And I thought that was such a good question. Well, I can share that how I navigate that space in Texas is that when I am talking to legislators, I do share unintended consequences of bills, and I do let them know how things would disproportionately affect people, whether it is LGBTQIA+ people or people of color. And I think the deeper question that you're asking about when the legislator themselves doesn't think that that's the intention, I don't know that you can really navigate it in just one meeting. So I think it's really what I try to do, at least, is to show, I don't try to attack when I'm doing it, but I just try to share, hey, this is how this bill will actually impact Texans. And this will have a negative impact on people who live in your district. And I really try to keep it focused on the impact on Texans, the impact on the people in their district, but not make it, you did this on purpose. You did this racist thing. And again, that is the space that I'm coming from. There are other grassroots advocacy groups that kind of engage in that space that can say things more bluntly. But I really try to focus on the fact. I really try to focus on the implications of what the bill would do to people of color, and just try to reiterate that. And I always offer to connect people to social workers that live in their district, because that might help them make a connection that if they're not really getting it from me, they're like, oh, she's just another, progressive lobbyist. Having someone talk to someone who lives in their district, sometimes that really helps.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple of things to that very quickly. It has to do with what I said before. We've talking about changing the message or changing the messenger. So, it's thinking, I'm not the right person to go on a street corner, where there are kids giving out flyers. I mean, I think I could still reach them, but not for somebody who looks like them, who talks like them, who they may respect. And again, it's never either or. Can I never do it in this community of color? I don't think we believe in you have to be it to do it. Or at least not all the time. Otherwise, only young people would work with young people, elderly with elderly. We don't believe in that, but we know it's a different message and messenger, when it comes. So here's one example. To know that most people on public assistance are white. So yes, disproportionately, Jason. So I'm going to go to the other side of that, rather than pointing that out, is to talk about those folks, assuming we're talking about racism, directly or indirectly here, or other isms, that we have. So here, how many of you have gotten this? I anticipate that all of you have gotten from your students or colleagues. How come they have, right? How come they have? How come they're getting? And we hear all the time, how come the other is getting? So we have to say, we have to agree with them. Yes, they're getting whoever. Yes, the cutoff is at 65, you're 64. Yes, you don't qualify for this. So here's the question to you. How do we get what they have? So when you hear the question, how come they're getting, you can agree with them. I agree that somebody should get Medicaid, should get free education and so on. We probably agree with a lot of what people are saying. Most of them are disgruntled white people, but many, many people of color, and I know Latinos, many Spanish folks coming from Spanish-speaking countries, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, say that about other minority groups. So rather than say that's not true or you're racist or whatever, we have to just say yes. And the way you get it is by passing this law. This law will include your father. This law will include your grandma. This law will include your baby. So, again, it's a very intentional mind of what's going to influence them that won't do total damage to our codes. We're not asking you to sell your soul. But we are asking you to say what can move the needle for that person. You know what? If they can't, Alison said it, we vote them out. So don't tell me you're not going to sit out that election because there's no difference between X and Y. I've heard that too many years until the critical issue comes, and then there was a difference on that issue of who's sitting in the Texas legislature. So again, it's both and. Be active, be out there on the street. I saw somebody say they've written many letters in the chat. You keep it up, and you know what? Don't wait for them to call you back. The one thing I'll say to Alison in your presentation is, maybe they'll get back to you. No, say to them, when can I call you again? When can I find out? We're coming back in a month. That's holding them accountable and being respectful. Oh, you told us you'll do it. You told us you can't do it this year. Okay, we're coming back next year, and come back with more troops.
Yeah, I think to the, how do you handle when you're sending letters and they're not being responded to? I actually think that calls are more effective than emails or letters for that reason, because a call does take up a staffer's time. And if the staffer gets a lot of calls on one bill, it's taking up their time, and usually their boss, or at least in my case, when I was a staffer, my boss would want to know what people were calling about. Why were 50 people calling about one thing? So I think calls are helpful. And honestly, Denise, I encourage you to try to find a group of like-minded people that you can join, whether it's an organization in your local area, just so that you're not doing this alone. Because I hear you. And I think if I was still in my hometown trying to do this work, I'd feel very disheartened. So try to find like-minded people to kind of keep the morale up and that you can work together.
Well, I think we've got two more questions that are kind of on the brink here, if we can address them. And I think that they're somewhat related, as you were saying. But if we have people who are working, I always answer my students by saying, well, what are your values? And do you think massive social change happens overnight? I think we need to parcel it out and see what we can grab on now. And that sort of goes back to this other question, which is, how do you revitalize a stagnating issue or idea that may have hit a roadblock? And I think a perfect example of that is dealing with gun violence, and how after every shooting, and we just had a shooting at a high school in Arlington, my hometown, where I live now, and it's gun rights have been an issue for decades and decades. And how do we actually get beyond the hopes and prayers? That's kind of a big question, and one of motivation. And how do we keep the strength to keep going on? Big question.
I mean, the strength to carry on and strength to go on. I mean, I think, and I don't want to sound cynical, but I feel like if you are not someone who can accept or be okay with some incremental changes, then maybe working in this space extremely closely might not be the right fit for you, because in Texas, we are never going to be able to just walk into the Capitol and just get all of our wishes made. That's just the reality. So you have to be okay to compromise and to be okay with incremental change. But that doesn't mean you bend over backwards. That doesn't mean you stop trying. And that doesn't mean that you move away from social work values. But I think it's the working in coalition. All of our work is with other groups. And that gives me a lot of encouragement that I'm not the only one fighting on this, that we're working together. I also think, being okay, maybe not being okay with it, but praising and being happy and celebrating when you do have little wins, because you have to in Texas, or else you're going to get burnt out really quick. And something that hasn't been brought up is self-care. I'm not the best at it. I talk to my interns about it, and then I myself don't always do it. But you have to take care of yourself, or else you can't do this. And you have to have a sense of humor to be in Texas politics. As a social worker.
You're right. I want to say that self-care is getting a bad rap lately as individuals. So I think it's really important that self-care could be doing the work. I think that kindred spirits group, whether it's today, I go to CSWE every year for I don't know, 50 years since I graduated at 20 or something in the for my kindred spirits group. That's what renews me, and I think that's what Rick was talking. So one is a small group. When I lived in Virginia when Nixon ran against McGovern, so that was my first time voting, remembering that there were 56,000 people who voted in our county for Nixon and 7,000 who voted for McGovern. Well, I wanted to find those 7,000, right? Sometimes it's easy to find it when there's a few folks. And maybe we stop using the word self-help and call it mutual aid. So I want to say again, I'm talking a lot today about reframing the question, reframing the message. By using self-help, it sounds very individual and very private, but it's nothing self-help about self-help groups. They're all about, you can't do it alone. You need a group, you need a community. So why are we calling it self-help? So I asked my students and my colleagues, and I'm saying it today, when somebody says a self-help group in whatever they mean, say, oh, you mean a mutual aid group? Just to get people to think, because again, in an individualist capitalist society, we know where we are. And Julie asked a question, I don't know if she's still on, Julie, about balancing the partisan and nonpartisan. It's extremely important that you say who you're representing, which hat you're wearing, even though they know. Everybody's going to know my politics, but I say I'm not here to talk about the party, and I'm here to talk about the issue. And again, in so-called red states, it's going to be harder for some of you, as Alison said. It's going to be harder. You're going to be intimidated. Why do you want to register people to vote? You're only going to get Democrats. I'm not telling them who to vote for. It's their right. And again, being courageous, but you don't have to be out there alone. Find an ally inside or outside. There's nothing better for self-help than not feeling alone, to me. So that's my little stance against around what's happening with the term self-help and self-care since it came into the NASW code. Somehow people are condemning it as like we're all of a sudden doing it one at a time. We're not. Self-help, self-care is what people make it to be. Mm-hmm. My daughter tells me my passion is my work. She says, my passion is not painting or going on a vacation. Whatever you get joy from. If you have to step away, I'm not telling you you never step away, you work, but it's not being busy, it's being stressed, right? Mm-hmm. There's a difference between working hard and being stressed. And I think that's what we're talking about.
And the last thing, just really quick, it is tying with a joke, so we can end on a joke, but
please do.
That we joke all the time about the NASW chapters that are in red states, that all of the government relations directors, all the time we joke that we're going to start a support group that's for conservative states. Because you have to find people that you can laugh with. You have to find people that you can, acknowledge the wildness that's happening in all of our states, but without losing hope.
Just don't Twitter it. Just be careful that there's no such thing as privacy anymore. There's no such thing as being, if you use that as a principle and not a problem, it's not a problem. It's a principle of practice. Whatever you say to somebody is going to go beyond that. Are you prepared for that? It's not don't do it. It's are you prepared for it going viral? Are you prepared for it getting back to your boss? It is a time for being cautious at the same time that we take risks.
Well, I think it feels odd to close out the session twice since I mistakenly did it 15 minutes ago. But I have to say this extra 15 minutes has been full of advice, optimism, a joke or two, maybe. We all need to laugh. And so I talk about finding your tribe. I think everyone on this session feels connected in some way. I know I do. I feel uplifted. I feel hopeful. I think that we have means, no matter where we live and whatever the political administration is, we've been reminded that relationships are important and to be working with other people who have the same ideas that we do without denigrating the people who don't agree with us. Work with them, find areas of commonality. So, Alison, thank you so much. Terry, thank you so much as well. And to everyone in the audience, I'll just read this in case you didn't read this already. Blanca says, I'm so pleased with this symposium. Of all the virtual events I've participated in since the pandemic, this has been absolutely the best. And we have our guests to thank for that. And Blanca, thank you so much for saying that. And with that, I think we'll call this session to a close. But remember, come back in half an hour for our next session. This is Rick Hofer, Director of SPEAK, signing off.